We're now going to enter into a time of discussion on our panel, and I would like to invite Rabbi Gaylia Rooks to join us for the rest of our conversation. Rabbi Rooks is a Rabbi Emerita of the temple in Louisville, where she served for 30 years. Moral side of the news, serving on Crusade for Children Clergy's Allocations Committee, and working with many community organizations like Interfaith Paths to Peace. She was ordained from the Hebrew Union College and earned her doctorate of ministry from Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary and a Doctor of Hebrew Letters. Rabbi Rooks will respond to our panelists and then join us for discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan, for having me. It's such an honor to be here. I've been on the board of Center for Interfaith Relations for decades, I guess, right, Sarah? And Festival of Faiths is just very near and dear to my heart. So having the honor of speaking and being in discussion with my colleagues here is really fabulous. And I know we're running a little behind schedule, so I'm going to try to be quick. Jews are called the people of the book. And of course, even before there were books, there were oral stories passed down from generation to generation, traditions, starting with the Bible. And stories play such an important role in our lives, especially, I like to think, during the holidays. And the holiday that is the most celebrated, observed holiday in Judaism, not necessarily the most significant holiday, but the one that you find more Jews participating in its rituals, is the holiday of Passover, which really makes sense because in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses of the Bible, we are commanded, tell your children every year. And the story is retold using all our senses of smell and taste and song, and there are family rituals and traditions that go on through the generations. The book that we use at the Passover meal is called the Haggadah, which means the telling, and it tells the story about how we came to be slaves in Egypt and how God, with a mighty arm and an outstretched hand, led us to freedom. Nobel laureate Elie Weisel said that God created human beings because God loves stories. and I love, I think, Ruben, were you the one who said that we are a storytelling animal? I love that expression. Storytelling is a Jewish way of life. It's how we transmit values, and I think that we've heard that from all the panelists. But telling stories is not just for the sake of education, it's really also for the sake of transformation. So Jews are a storytelling people, and I would like to tell you a very, very short Hasidic tale. But first I need to explain what Hasidic means, or what it meant at the time this story was written. Hasidism is a movement, a renewal movement in Israel. It was founded by the holy Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, who was born in the very late 1600s and died in 1760 in Ukraine. He was a mystic and a healer and the founder of Hasidic Judaism. And at this time, especially in Eastern Europe, Jews were suffering greatly. They were persecuted, they were subjected to living in horrible poverty, and there was even a great deal of illiteracy, which among the Jewish people is very uncommon, and was a sense of shame and embarrassment for many Jews who felt that if they couldn't read the prayer books and in the holy language, the common spoken language was Yiddish at that time in that part of the world, but if they couldn't read the holy books, how would they draw closer to God? And the Baal Shem Tov, which literally means master of the good name, or one who has a good name, and you may hear the word besht, which is an acronym of Baal Shem Tov. He said that basically it has to do with your spirituality. And if you don't know how to read the holy language of Hebrew, it doesn't mean that you can't commune with your Creator. It doesn't mean you can't rejoice and sing and dance and look for God's presence everywhere in all the beauty and sacred experiences and things and people and nature and relationships all around. And that by living in joy and living to help other people, that's how you interact with the divine. And in the 18th century, Hasidism spread throughout Eastern Europe. With the destruction of 3/4 of European Jews in the Holocaust, today most Hasidim live in Israel or the United States. It has changed a great deal. I won't put a value judgment on that. I will just say that I think they've gone a long way from their roots. But this is a story that begins with the founder of the Hasidic movement, the great Baal Shem Tov. And the story is told that whenever he realized that there was a great threat to the Jews, that some misfortune was about to come upon them, it was his custom to go into a certain place in the woods, a certain part of the forest, to meditate. And there he would light a special fire and say a particular prayer, and a miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune would be averted. Later, when his disciple Dov Ber, who's the celebrated Maggid of Mizritz, when he had occasion for some reason to need to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest. And he said, "Creator of the universe, listen to my prayer. I do not know how to light the sacred fire, but I am here in this place and I am able to say the words of the holy prayer." And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Another generation passed, and Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save his people once more, would go to the forest and say, "I do not know how to light the fire, and I do not know the words to the special prayer, but I know this place here in the woods, and that has to be sufficient." And indeed, it was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. In the 4th generation, it fell to Rabbi Israel of Rezin to overcome misfortune. He sat at home in his chair with his head in his hands and poured out his heart to God. "Ribono shel olam, I am unable to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, and I can't even find the sacred spot in the forest. All I can do is tell the tale." And that too was sufficient. Now that is not by far my favorite Hasidic story. There are hundreds that I like better, but it just kept calling to me that I had to tell this story about the power of telling stories. And I loved the stories that each one of our panelists shared with us. A teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, he wrote, "Your fellow human being is a mirror for you. If there is love and compassion in your soul, you will see goodness in others. If you see blemish in another, it is your own imperfection you encounter. Take careful note of the flaws you perceive in others. This is a lesson for you. They are your own flaws set before you, a reminder of your own spiritual work." And I feel that what we all have in common is this idea of the other, and the Baal Shem Tov came as a source of renewed energy to relieve the unbearable pain in the souls of the Jewish people at the time. And he taught that the Almighty could be served best through joy and cheer and helping other people, especially helping those who have lost their faith and encouraging them to put faith in their Creator, the Holy One, blessed be. And that's how he taught Torah, how he taught the Bible, by filling the hearts of his disciples and all who heard him with indescribable joy. He was very into spiritual rapture. He taught a lot of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. There are stories of miraculous healings and all amulets that he would make, and he was most famous for his stories. The power of storytelling, not just for the Hasidic Jews, but I think everyone here has referred to this in one way or another, is the ability to reach all the members of the community. So, Judith, you were talking about how everyone would gather in the village and listen to the stories of the elders. The Baal Shem Tov would gather all the people together. And from the one who would dig the clay, which is, by the way, what the Baal Shem Tov used to do before he became a great rabbi, to the greatest biblical scholars among them, the wonder of the stories and the power in the stories are the multiple layers in which the stories can be understood. They are accessible on different levels. So what a child may hear, or someone who's not well educated may hear, or someone who, all different levels of understanding and insight come to you where you are at. And I think that is something that we all share in common. The simplest level for all to understand. We're looking at this story that talks about the decline in the generations. And I feel the weight of that very strongly. I don't know if others of you out here, or I know that we're being live streamed, those of you in other places, or even here in Louisville, but in your own homes, or the panel members, how you feel that. But there are hints below hints below hints of deeper levels if we search for them, and a hidden mystical level for those who are really deeply searching. And one of the messages in this is that survival, even in the most challenging and difficult of times, means changing and adapting. And that's part of what faith helps us do. And I think that all of our speakers were talking about that. Mourning loss, remembering perhaps an easier or better way of life. The spirit of our beliefs carries us wherever we go. You were talking about pilgrimage, and we are the wandering Jews because we keep getting kicked out of different places, but we can carry our stories with us. And so our beliefs and the power of our stories continue on. And we need to recognize that pain is a part of life, as you were saying, and you can never really go back, and especially for the Jewish people after the Nazis, just being a fragment of the numbers that we used to be. But we still need to find joy and holiness wherever we can, cleaving to God, dveikut. That's what the Hasidim, that's what the Baal Shem Tov would talk about. And I like that this story talks about a fire, because the symbolism of the light and the stories, all these stories bring such light to the world. And in our darkest moments, faith in our communities, the shards of light that we all carry within us, bring light and joy even in the darkest of moments. And in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, everything carries sparks of light that can be lifted up and returned to the Holy One, source of all. I mean, every human being, doesn't matter how wealthy you are, how well educated you are, what your own personal theology, philosophy, your route to the divine, to that holy experience, every single person is your neighbor. So we started with, where did I write this? Because I looked this up. We started with Leviticus in the 5 books of Moses, the book of Leviticus in the Bible, chapter 19, which is called the Holiness Code. Leviticus 19:18 says, "Love thy neighbor as thyself. And I love the idea that, your neighbor, and we are very guilty of this, that we live in neighborhoods of people who are of the same socioeconomic status, maybe the same color, maybe the same religion, maybe the same beliefs, but that's not our neighbor. That's the easy part, although it's not always so easy, is it? But in Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you would find hurtful. And in Judaism, well, starting with Leviticus, but also Rabbi Hillel in the 1st century, what is hateful to you, do not do to another. All the rest is commentary, he said. Go and learn it. But that's the principle. What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. And then Jesus turned that from the negative, do not do, into the positive, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's the Christian philosophy. In Islam, no one is a believer until they desire for the other what they desire for themselves. So we're seeing the Baha'i, blessed is one who prefers another before themselves. So I think that we're seeing this call throughout the ages, cross-culturally, cross-religiously, but who is the other? And is that not the most important story that we tell, our story as human beings, of children of the divine, of the stewards of this beautiful planet that we are currently doing our best to destroy? There is a little bit of that if you look for it. I'll give one example. In the quintessential Jewish story of the Exodus from Egypt, so we were slaves and we go free after the 10 plagues and we get to the Red Sea is in front of us, and Pharaoh, who of course has changed his mind and sent his soldiers after us. So the chariots are behind us, the Red Sea is in front of us, and with a miracle, God parts the waters, and we march across. When the last Israelite gets to the other side in safety, the waters close down, and there is a midrash. Midrash is great. It's stories about stories in the Bible. That's my favorite thing. And in the midrash, it says that the angels are rejoicing in heaven, and God silences them and says, how can you sing? How can you dance? Those are my children who are drowning in the sea. And there are other examples of that. And I thought that maybe that some of our speakers would be willing to maybe share an idea of places in your tradition where peek behind the curtain and walk in someone else's shoes and see what that feels like. Is that something that resonates with anyone here who would like to share?
Well, I've actually written about Jonah in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's a canonical prophetic text in all three traditions. And Jonah is a very reluctant prophet who, as we find in the Hebrew Bible, does not want to preach forgiveness to the Ninevites. And so even after he sees obvious signs of their conversion, their repentance, he sits at the edge of the city to wait for the 40 days to pass, hoping that God will in fact punish them. Mm-hmm. And then when God doesn't, he gets very angry, right? And the story ends very abruptly, but basically, the gist of it is, I gave life. God tells Jonah, I gave life to all those people and all those animals. And why shouldn't we rejoice that they're living instead of dead?
Right, and the story is that he's out in the desert and a gourd grows up and gives him shade, and then the next morning God sends a worm to destroy the gourd, and Nineveh is so upset, and God says, Nineveh is so upset, Jonah is so upset, and God says, you're upset about the gourd, that one plant that you didn't plant the seed, create it, water it, till it, care for it, and you're upset that one plant died. What about all my children? And these are all such eye-opening stories. It's like, oh yeah, right, it's not all about me. Judith, did you want-
Others?
Because the Shantideva in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism talks about the importance of exchanging the self for the other. That is, the foundation of compassion practice is beginning to realize that in many ways, the suffering of others is much more important than our own, and that our own suffering is something we've learned to deal with and such and work with. But for so many people, the only thing that we can really do to help is to place their suffering as more important than our own, and to literally practice breathing in their suffering and extending our own well-being to them. So the focus, particularly of the 8th chapter of Shantideva, is on how we begin to recognize that our suffering is not just our own, and that for others, because it's such a burning thing, and they have not necessarily the tools and the ways of working with suffering, that it's important to extend oneself to the other in that way. So this is the backbone of the Mahayana tradition, and Shantideva was an 8th century Indian saint who his teachings have been incredibly important throughout the Buddhist world.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are stories, Rabbi, but I think I just want to, instead of narrating a long story, to just affirm what Judith said. In the Hindu tradition, the one who knows God, the one who is liberated, is consistently described as the person who embraces the suffering and the joy of others as his or her own suffering and joy, and then works actively to alleviate that suffering. The texts that describe such a person, those texts do not limit the other whose joy and suffering you identify with. It's a very inclusive description, the joy and suffering of the other.
And that story you told us about Krishna, that as soon as you think that you're the only one Krishna is dancing with, poof.
It's a fascinating part of the story. It's this big circle of dance.
But our interdependence.
Yes.
And I think that's something that Louisville tries to be really good at. Here's a COVID thing. I stopped wearing a watch. I have no idea what time it is.
Oh, right in front of you.
Oh, it's 8 o'clock? No. We have 8 minutes left.
Yes.
Thank you. It says 8 o'clock. I just want to put in a plug for Louisville, which created the Festival of Faiths all these years ago. And is this the 26th? Is that where we are? Hard to believe. There are interfaith roots in Louisville that people don't even know about. Those of you who are here, if you're from Louisville, how many of you have heard of the Hunger Walk? Okay, and that was created as an interfaith effort between a rabbi, a priest, and a minister. Walked into a, no. But there was a child who starved to death and was freezing under a bridge in Louisville one night, and all the faith leaders got together and said, not in our city. And when the River Road Mosque, the Islamic Center for Compassion, I'm missing something there. I still think of it as the River Road Mosque, just a few years ago was desecrated with graffiti. The entire city came out. There were literally thousands of people. I was talking to Dr. Muhammad Babar, who's a great Muslim leader in our community and the head of Muslim Americans for Compassion. And he said that if everyone who came who wanted to paint got one postage stamp size place to paint, they could have repainted the entire mosque. And it's, the mayor came down and all the faiths were represented when there was a threat against the Jewish community, when the temple, No, not the Hindu temple. No, here in town. Here in town. What was it? It was the Hindu temple. No wonder I can't think of what it was besides the Hindu temple. And someone broke in and stabbed a knife in a chair and did, damage and stuff. And the whole community came out. I just recently heard, and this was pre-COVID, so I don't know how long ago it was, not that long. And I just recently heard that one group sent flowers every day for weeks and weeks and weeks, and now on the anniversary of when that happened, they send flowers, just as a sign of love and support. And certainly, Louisville is not perfect. We have a long way to go in race relations and all the rest of it.
I love these local examples because I feel as though they get to why do we even share our sacred stories with one another? Why do we bother to make relationship across difference? And not only is our personal storytelling an act of resilience when we choose to tell our stories again and again, but then when we share them, we weave this fabric together. And I am just looking at our time and would love to invite us into a closing reflection together. For each of the panelists and for you, Rabbi Rooks, to answer for us, how does this sharing of sacred stories contribute to our flourishing? Does all of this matter? And for each of us to end with a closing remark on that question.
I'll begin since I was first, and in some ways, and I'll keep it very brief because we have 4 minutes left, which has to include also 3 minutes of silence. Is that right?
We will move
so
beyond
perhaps
time.
3 minutes of silence. Anyway, what matters, and the reason why these sacred stories really work is from what I receive from my own tradition is the importance of not just trying to create some pie in the sky kind of story for the future, which some activists are wanting to do, but to really recognize and be realistic about the circumstances in which we are, and recognize that our shared anguish about the state of the world is a sign of our fundamental wholeness and goodness and instinct for healing. And as we acknowledge that instinct for healing, we already begin to surface the story that we can create together for shared flourishing. But it begins with some collective acknowledgement, individual acknowledgement, and collective acknowledgement that it is really a rough time. And our vision is coming out of something so fundamental in our instinct for wholeness, instinct for healing that is there, which in my tradition we call basic goodness or Buddha nature, which is already envisioning a future together. So maybe we'll go in the order of presentation and...
Sure. Megan, a short answer to a very beautiful
big question.
And as human beings, as a human being, I need other human beings to be human. I cannot be human outside of a community of human beings. In a similar way, I think that our traditions need each other to be more fully our traditions. I have experienced this personally, and this is why my pilgrimage, in addition to trying to get deeper and deeper into my own tradition, has been a pilgrimage of openness and learning from other religious traditions, because I've discovered that I need the wisdom, I need the friendship of my neighbors of other faiths to discover my own tradition more fully, but also to expand my spiritual vision. We often think of or represent our traditions as having no need for other traditions, as having a self-sufficiency that makes other traditions, we are indifferent to other traditions. Other traditions are redundant. We can be ourselves without the other. I think we have to challenge that viewpoint. And the only way to challenge it is really by engagement, listening to the stories of others. We have heard our stories. We are, to some extent, we are very familiar with our own stories. We need to open up our hearts and minds to the stories of others. And to love others, to care for others, to be compassionate to others, we have to know them. To love another requires knowing the other. And I think this is why hearing the stories of the other, contemplating those stories, are necessary for our mutual flourishing.
Thank you. Ruben?
Older I get, the more attractive the mystical theologians become. And I become increasingly frustrated in my inability to relate to my Gen Z students. And yet we found a common bond in this almost despair and hopelessness about politics, about environmental degradation. And I'm beginning to realize that if we're going to find some common ground, it's going to be through story, but not just story as something we all enjoy, or even something that educates, but what makes, to me, stories, sacred stories, is its transformation. And so if we're going to rediscover hope, it's going to be through something beyond ourselves breaking into this world and guiding us into a better future.
Thank you.
And it's not that hard. I mean, I had never met any of the people on the stage before this afternoon, and we sat around in the green room and we showed each other pictures of our kids and our grandkids, and we told stories about where we were born. And I mean, I think that the fear of other religions or other races or other beliefs it's just ignorance. And people say to me, isn't it hard doing all that interfaith work? And I don't think it's hard at all. I think it's glorious. I think it's inspirational, what we learn from other people. I'm just going to end with one sentence to Judith. You were saying about what should come first, justice or peace. And our tradition says, Marbet Torah, that's the first half of the sentence. Marbet Tzedakah, Marbet Shalom. Increasing justice increases peace. And they are integrally related.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our amazing speakers today.